Well, welcome to another edition of the CSG podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We have a very special guest. His name is Steve Forrest. Hey, Steve.
Hey.
Steve and I worked together many years ago at some previous companies, and Steve is really a specialist in network. He's been in the call center world forever. He knows about networks. He knows about all the kinds of things that companies that are designing their call centers around and their networks around. Steve, if you want to add something in there, I know I didn't have a great bio for you, but what would you like to add to that beautiful intro?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I mean, I've been in the IT industry for about 30 years. Started off, back in the early transition of frame relay and migrations to the new stuff, and have just gone upwards and outwards from there on a variety of different topics. So
yeah, you've been a pleasure to work with. We worked on some pretty large projects over the years,
this is true.
And we just recently reconnected, and I said, Steve, we need you on the program, because he brought up something that I think you all are interested in. And we're all talking about AI these days. And Steve brought up a term to me called Agentic AI, if I'm saying that right.
You are.
And in essence, he's going to tell us all about it. But it's about using agents to help what you can already do that's built into an action plan. But Steve, why don't you give our audience a little background? What is Agentic AI, and why should they be paying attention to it?
Right. So Agentic AI is the concept of leveraging an agent that has artificial intelligence built into it to do tasks that are typically predefined, but in many cases, they can break it into subtasks, they can act independently, they can adapt as necessary, and they can collaborate, right? But it's an artificial intelligent agent that, is now helping workers and knowledge workers to perform tasks that are more efficient than what they would be able to achieve without having these agents. We're starting to see a big adoption across the enterprise customers, where they're saying the stat is in the next 5 years, the average knowledge worker in the enterprise is going to have up to 10 different agents that they're working with just to do their daily tasks, which is pretty interesting.
When you say knowledge worker, are you talking about a help desk person, or what do you give us an idea what you're saying there?
Well, I would say anybody that's working on a PC right now is going to be considered a knowledge worker, right? So any type of tasks you're working with, whether it's a contact center agent, an insurance agent, a salesperson, a customer service rep, a vice president of finance, are all using these agents to better support their tasks and duties. I mean, network operators are what I'm mostly exposed to these days, and that's one of the big use cases we're seeing for agents on your network to help you understand exactly what's happening on the network. Why I thought this topic would be of interest to CSG was really the fact that you guys are focused on helping customers build better networks, right? And as we're seeing this prolific growth in leveraging agents, so agentic agents, right? So agents using AI on the environment, we're talking about, how does that going to impact the network? Did you properly plan how these agents were going to flow? Is this agent living in your physical building? Is it living in the cloud? Is it living in a data center? And if you're expecting your employees to leverage these agents, you really need to properly plan, provide enough quality of service, really enough capacity for these use cases to actually be effective in the environment. You're looking at really significant investments in the enterprise, right? AI has been a buzzword across the industry. Every person, every CEO in some way is mentioning AI in their presentations, and that's, you see a lot of valuations growing because people say they're using AI, which is great, and it's a huge tool. We're seeing a lot of challenges in finding that folks that are implementing these services either didn't properly plan the way they were going to roll it out, so they didn't put enough capacity in the network, they didn't realize the subcomponents required to make an effective traffic flow for these agents to get to their knowledge workers, and their expected return on the investment into these AI projects is not what they originally planned for. So, the concepts that I'm talking about here is just about thinking about blocking and tackling. If you're introducing an artificial agent into your environment, there's a lot of implications here, right? I mentioned, latency, packet loss, jitter, all these things that we've talked about for 100 years in the networking industry, whether it be for voice traffic or other real-time video traffic. It's the same concept with these AI agents. If they're not getting the throughput, the performance and response time that you're expecting, they're going to be ineffective and not work well and create frustration in the environment. So, a lot of the premise around, why I wanted to have a talk with you is you guys are the experts, right? You guys know how to build networks. And when you're consulting with your customers and your partners, a lot of your customers are out there building these new agentic agents, and these are getting plopped on the existing network, and you're not even realizing it. All of a sudden, you get a trouble ticket open, like, something's happening on my network. Well, peel back the onion. What's the big traffic flows that have been increased on your environment? And we're finding in many cases it's these agents. So, once again, being the proper consultant that you guys are, I thought this would be a topic, that would be resonating with your customers and partners.
Well, it's very interesting for us to learn about it as you said, as we try to help our customers. Are you talking about? Let's be specific. We hear a lot about people implementing Copilot and Gemini and all these different AI applications pushed out by Google, Microsoft, etc. You're saying you should really plan these things better to match your network capabilities.
Yes, your capacity. I mean, you really got to think about a bunch of things, right? So, number one, bandwidth, obviously, latency. That's like any real-time application, you're going to want that. Segmentation and prioritization, right? Is making sure that when you're planning out how these are going to behave on your environment, that you're not letting bad actors in the door, posing as some of these tools. Now, I mentioned agents, right? So, yeah, Copilot is an example. Google Gemini. Those are, large language model. They're not specific agents that have been purpose-built by an enterprise to perform a enhanced function to help their business knowledge workers to be better at their role, provide better customer service, better customer insights, things like that. So these custom AI capabilities could live in their environment. They could still be hosted in a Copilot or an AWS or Anthropic. I mean, there's many providers of AI use cases out there in the wild that depending on how you want to consume them, they could live in your environment. They could live in the cloud. Frequently, what we see is clients are building their proofs of concept in a cloud-based architecture. And then when they're ready to go to production, they're bringing that large language model or agent in-house for a number of reasons. Because number one, it's expensive to run AI in the cloud, but also have better security and controls for some in-house planning.
Wow, there's a lot of stuff to start planning and thinking about in this new world that we live in. One cool thing that you brought up as an example, and in our world, and many of my friends out there are MSPs that are help desk and have IT guys that are managing and monitoring other companies' networks. Your agentic model, I thought you gave an interesting sample of how an agentic working alongside, let's say, an IT help desk person can actually see the problem first and almost start the steps to fix it before these guys even get started. Can you give us an idea of an example of that?
So, yeah, I mean, Dave, that's a classic example, right? So what you're thinking about here is, I'll say this, and it's an interesting stat, right? The past 15 years, there was a real shift in college education, right? And you saw a lot more students going to school for computer science because they thought, hey, I'm going to program software, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a great field to be in. That's never going to go away. And who is the biggest victim of AI, right? Is software developers, right? Because basically a machine actually writes better software than a human, in most cases, right? So the concept where agents really make sense is areas where you're using a machine to monitor a machine. So a good example of that would be network devices, right? So leveraging a machine to monitor activities on the network and determine if the client connected to the network or the devices connected to the network are performing optimally. And they'll use this by doing trending, right? So they're looking at traffic flows to say, okay, what's normal state? It'll also look at, CPU utilization. It'll look at throughput. It'll look at capacity. It might look at, if you're seeing a lot of retransmissions in a certain area that or let's say a long latency on a particular application. That's all of these are symptoms that a machine, all of these little things that could be happening on the network that could go wrong would create symptoms that would impact users, right? So the idea of having an agent that can monitor 24/7, 365 days a week, the network to say, hey, what's actually happening on the network? And if there's an issue, proactively either, if it has the knowledge in and of itself, fix it, right? That's the key, right? Agentic, it's going to fix it because I know what the problem is. And guess what? If it doesn't know what the problem, or I'm sorry, once it knows what the problem is, maybe you don't want to let everything be fixed by a machine because there's certain things that you might want a human to have control over. So in this case, it would proactively alert, the service desk to say, hey, proactively open a case. I'm seeing a port down in this particular location. Hey, and maybe they know, yeah, I'm aware because there's a power outage, right? So cool, they can turn that alarm off because they know, hey, there's a power outage in that site. But in many cases, they don't, right? Or maybe a wireless access point went offline, right? They're going to want to know that before, they want to know that at 2 a.m. They don't want to know it at 8:30 a.m. when people show up at the office and they can't connect to the network. And then it's a fire drill. So if you can proactively understand what's happening in your environment and then improve upon that, and that also helps for planning, right? So I talked about the impact of agentic, right? So these agents are now operating on your network. So you may not know what that impact's going to be, but having a tool that actually allows you to monitor the flows of these particular applications on your environment and be able to track that over time allows you to plan. And you say, oh, whoa, I'm seeing a big spike. I better add some capacity here. Or maybe I need to slow my roll of this particular agent. I do it with my little, pilot group, and I look, hey, how did that impact their environment? And then I say, okay, well, I saw that didn't really do anything, right? It didn't have any impact. Cool, I'm good to go. Let's roll it out to the rest of the group. Or maybe I say, holy cow, I saw double the bandwidth utilization at that site. I'm going to have an impact on other applications. I want to make sure I increase the capacity to allow that particular agent to be better performant and not impact others. So there's a lot of really interesting nuances that people aren't thinking about, right? And I mentioned this whole software development thing. Well, the other stat, which is kind of crazy, is they're saying all this network engineers that have been out there doing this for years, 75%, so 3 out of 4 network engineers, that's in their title, they're eligible to retire in the next 5 years. They're going to reach retirement age.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy. So you're seeing a decrease in number of network engineers. So in that particular space, having these tools to make the existing folks that are still around operate more efficiently and giving them faster mean time to recovery when they're having that. You mentioned MSPs, right? So MSPs are using these tools today, right? And they're selling new tools to basically help enhance their offerings, right? So understanding exactly what's happening with your customer, are they rolling out agents? That's a perfect opportunity to have a conversation and say, hey, have you considered the impact that this is going to have on your environment? Well, no. Okay, well, maybe we should start looking at better monitoring, better tools to help you understand what your goals are and how these new applications that you're implementing in your environment are going to impact the overall network, and let's plan for that properly. Because it's always we've all encountered a scenario where we added, something that we didn't think was a big deal. Hey, what's a big deal? We're going to run 4K video, right? That all of a sudden your branch goes offline. Nobody can get on the internet because you got some guy streaming, 4K video to his desk, and you didn't, restrict that on your network. So we've all had these experiences. We know what, we're talking about. So having that, planning up front and doing these things up front, I think is really key. Now, I'll also say, this other piece of the business, which I think you guys also play a big part in, is security, right? And this could be data loss prevention, understanding, supply chain risks, all of these different things as you're using AI to go out and do great things. If it's not properly segmented, locked down, I mean, think about this, right? You've got users. One of the big things we've talked about for 10 years is the Internet of Things, right? It's this dramatic proliferation of devices that connect to the internet, right? And we talked a lot about how certain IoT devices aren't really built for security. Many times they're like cameras, there's like, environmental system. They just aren't.
Temperature gauge.
Yeah, they're built to be cheap, and they aren't built to have like a .1x, supplicant on them to give you that extra information that you need to lock that thing down. So this same premise holds true with AI. If you're not properly locking down these agents, understanding where they should be going, there is a potential for bad actors to get in there and impact that environment. So, there's so much to unpack around what agentic AI is doing to our network, our security posture, and our profile. It's really fascinating. And for me, like, I learn every day, new things about this. And it's really interesting as you talk more and more about this, how, the C-suite is really hot on this. And if you're a network provider, you're a network manager, a good way to find some budget is to say, hey, I need to have some budget to enable these initiatives that you're talking about with AI, because guess what? My network's not exactly ready for that. And if we're not properly planning, if we're not working with our consultants to understand that impact, I think, we're going to put ourselves in a bad place. And go, oh, by the way, Mr. CEO who just said I'm going to earmark, $10 million or $10 billion, depending on the size of the company, to implement AI, and I forgot to spend the, 100 grand to properly outfit my network with the tool set I needed to be successful, then shame on you. It's bad. You're throwing bad money away. Let's think about this up front. Be consultative. Have that open conversation. I think, once again, Dave, these are topics that are kind of new, right? This agentic AI thing. Google it. There's a lot of buzz about it. But how are we as consultants out there in the world understanding the impact that this is having to our customers, to our partners, and to our environment? I think is something that we need to continue to be speaking about every day.
That's a great cautionary tale. We could probably talk about this for another 30, 45 minutes. We try to keep it to within this little frame. So yeah. I hope that we can do another talk and take it to the next level. If anybody out there wants to learn more, please feel free to get a hold of us. We can bring Steve in if we need to consult. And really appreciate your time today, Steve. It's been great talking to you. And I hope you all out there got a little something from us. Appreciate you. See you next time.
All right, nice meeting you, everybody. Thanks, Dave. Great to see you.